Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, and on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSPod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my monthly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Now, this week's show kind of captures all of those topics, books, art, comics, and culture, because our guest is Karen Green, and she's the curator for Columbia University's Comics and Cartoons collection. We met last year at the MoCA Comics Festival in New York City and made general plans to record. It turns out she was a listener of the show, at least the comics ones that I've done. She recently got an appointment for this new role at Columbia where she was already working, and we go into all that. So I figured that was reason to, get off my ass and sit down with her. Also, it's really fun for me to talk comics with someone who loves the art form but doesn't actually make comics, and that's kind of a rare thing because most people I talk comics with, most people you find in the field, I guess, also are creators, and she and I distinctly are not creators. So it's a fun conversation. And that means this isn't the standard cartoonist-related episode. Another reason for that is because Karen's had a really, really fun life, at least, to an outside observer. She may disagree, but I think she would agree with that characterization, too. She's got plenty of stories about New York City life in the 70s and 80s and working as a bartender, and, the very start of this episode goes into some wacky territory, as I'll tell you in just a minute. Here's Karen's bio, which is adapted from her About.me page. Karen Green serves as curator for Comics and Cartoons at Columbia University. She founded the graphic novels collection in the Columbia University libraries while working as the ancient and medieval history librarian. She has acquired the papers of Chris Claremont, Wendy and Richard Pinney, Al Jaffe, and the Kitchen Sink Press for Columbia's rare book and manuscript library, as well as items from the estate of Jerry Robinson and research materials from Larry Tye's History of Superman. A former bartender, Green holds graduate degrees from Columbia University and Rutgers University. For 4.5 years, she wrote the Comic Adventures in Academia column for Comixology. She served as a Will Eisner Comics Industry Awards judge in 2011, a member of the jury for the Pulitzer Prize in Editorial Cartooning in 2014, serves as vice president of the board of directors of the Society of Illustrators, that might be out of date, and former trustee of the Museum of Comic and Cartoon Art, known as MoCA, before its transfer to the Society, and has taught and lectured on comics in academia and curated the fall 2014 exhibition, Comics at Columbia, Past, Present, and Future, in Columbia's rare book and manuscript library. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Karen Green, which begins partway through her anecdote about comparing notes on New York in the 80s with past pod guest Mimi Pond, and realizing they share a little something in common.
Gosh, it was a funny name. It was Chuck. I said, Chuck Willie? She said, yeah. I said, I had a one-night stand with him in 1983. And we both kind of screamed. And Ben Ketcher and Charles Burns were like looking at us, and we looked at them and we go, we fucked the same guy in 1983.
And that was, college. That all makes sense. It's a little, once you get out into the real world, that's something.
No, that was the real world.
And I will tell you, we're recording right now, but I'm going to cut this down. Don't worry, this won't go in. It's when I ask you about the new gig, it's where we start. Please trust me, because I've done 200
I don't care if you put that story, frankly.
But yeah, I have no idea with people and what their, hang-ups may be one way or the other. So the new gig.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Well, it hasn't actually begun yet.
What will you be doing?
So I will be doing to a great extent what I am already doing. Mm-hmm. But the priorities will have flipped. Okay. And the commitment that the libraries are showing to what I started here is now to a certain degree codified. So I was hired as the librarian for ancient and medieval history back in 2002. I started the graphic novels collection and our circulating collections in 2005. And in 2010, thanks to Chris Claremont, I started collecting creator archives for rare books. About 2 years ago, I was named an adjunct curator in rare books, just as a way of kind of bringing me under that umbrella, kind of socializing me so I wasn't quite such a feral curator, and giving me certain privileges, like the key to the rare book stacks. Now, I will actually be officially the curator for comics and cartoons. I will move upstairs into the rare book and manuscript library. I will still be doing ancient and medieval history, but that will now be hierarchically secondary, although I will still probably spend the same amount of time working on that as I do now. My responsibilities upstairs will be what they are now, to seek out, assess, and acquire collections of creators, editors, publishers, primarily from the New York City area, or things that have to do with the history of publishing, which is one of the strengths of our rare book and manuscript library to begin with. Promoting the collection, making sure that it's accessible, making sure that our faculty and students are aware of ways that they can use it in their teaching and research, and generally having a really good time. I have a very, very fun job, so I'm very lucky.
It seems the more comics librarians I meet, the more they seem to be thinking, how would I get away with this? That's
Yeah, that is definitely a factor. I have been so lovingly supported by this institution. Nobody ever blinked an eye at what I was doing. I was given help all along the way. The university librarians supported it. When I started, our new university librarian is the one who supported this change to actually create a position, curator for comics and cartoons, which means now if I get hit by a bus, there's going to need to be another curator for comics and cartoons, although I'm watching my step very carefully.
Although those buses were just running through red lights when I was walking down here, so you should be really careful.
Very cautious, very, very cautious.
Yeah, how did it all start in terms of the library, and then we'll talk about your history with comics. But what was the origin point for you for getting this off the ground?
The origin was
magic ring from space?
Poverty.
Rats. Okay. I was going with the Green Lantern thing. Damn it. Okay, go on.
I had liked comics growing up. I had read comics growing up, well into my 20s. And then from about 30 to 42, I was in school. And I didn't do any leisure reading in that time. And then I got this job, and about a year or so after I got my library legs and felt I could go back to doing things in my free time, I wonder what's going on with comics. And between 1991 and 2003, a lot.
Some stuff happened.
Some stuff had happened. So I don't even know how I picked this particular book, but I bought Paul Hornschmeier's Mother Come Home. Yeah. And it broke my heart. It was so beautiful and so moving, and I thought, well, this is something. And the next book I bought was Peter Cooper's Sticks and Stones. And I'm a huge political comics junkie to begin with, so that as a kind of political allegory was very congenial for me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, like, man, what else is going on out there? And then I discovered Fantagraphics, and I got their catalog, and this was back in the mail order catalog days. And I started buying things, and suddenly I realized that I could not afford to buy everything that I wanted to buy. Well, what are my options? What are my options? I don't have to schlep to the library. I work in a library. Wait, I work in a library. If I see a review of the latest, I don't know, Tom Robbins novel. Is there a latest Tom Robbins novel? I don't even know. I pulled that name out of the air. And I want to read it, then I can go into our stacks and find it because we will have bought that. Why can't I do that for the latest Peter Cooper graphic novel? But I knew that I couldn't use that as my argument. You don't pay me enough to support my comics habit, so could you start buying them for me? So I thought about it. How can I frame this in a way that will make good, sound library sense? So I started doing my research, and I looked to see what sort of scholarship was being done on comics. Not the obvious scholarship like on Maus. Everybody's written about Maus. This is not to knock Maus. There's a reason that everybody's written about Maus. But this is 2005. I started looking up Chris Ware and Frank Miller, and I'm still finding articles in peer-reviewed journals on these guys. I'm finding dissertations that have been written. Like, okay, so this shows that there is an academic discipline that can be supported by acquiring these materials. Then I also factored in that we have a film school and a film studies program, and the correlation between comics and film was already strong in 2005, only stronger now. In many ways, it was strong in a different way back then because there were more non-superhero films being made from comics, I think, than there are now, which I think is a shame that that's not still happening. And I also kind of framed a more sentimental argument, which is, so Columbia's official name is Columbia University in the city of New York. That's what's on the seal. That's what's on the stationery. Columbia University in the city of New York. And in America, comics were born in New York City. You have the first publication of Rodolphe Töpfer's Obadiah Oldbuck in a New York City magazine called Brother Jonathan. You have the comic strips that Joseph Pulitzer started publishing in The World, and then Hearst picked up for the New York Journal. So while I would never say that comics began in America, I would say that American comics began in New York. And so tracking that New York City history in an institution which has likewise been part of New York City history since 1754, which is when King's College was founded, seemed to make sense. Nobody else in New York was collecting comics at the time. No other research institution in New York. I mean, obviously, SVA had a great collection already. And probably
the Collier brothers. I'm just kidding. Go.
Most likely. I would hope so. I would hope they had the taste. So I brought together a group of people, our fine arts librarian, our graphic arts librarian, our American studies librarian, who were all people I felt might have a stake in this subject area, along with the person who was in charge of the budget and my supervisor. And I pitched it with these three arguments, and I brought in a little stack of books just to show the variety. I had, The Death of Gwen Stacy and Daredevil Love and War. Look at Gil Kane, look at Bill Sienkiewicz. This is comics. Look at Edward Gorey. Look at Peter Cooper.
And then you drop the Chris Ware mind bomb on them and watch everybody just kind of melt down?
No, I don't believe I brought in Chris Ware yet. And to my amazement, they said, yeah, okay. Do you want to do it? Why, yes, I do want to do it. Because I didn't know. Maybe one of those other three librarians felt that it was more appropriate for them to handle it. But no, they said, yes, Karen, you can have it. So they gave me a tiny budget, which I immediately overspent. And it's expanded since then. And that's how it began.
Now, how's the collection let's see, how does it segment between like circulating and the kind of archival? I don't know what you refer to it, or what the
Special
term.
collections.
Special collections. Yeah. How does that,
General
how do building
collections
those
and
differ?
special collections, as we say in the library biz.
Is it 12 years of education, you know?
Yes. So we have stacks that have a circulating collection. And things that go in there are basically things with an ISBN or a spine. I don't buy comic books, monthly pamphlets, floppies, periodicals, whatever you want to call them, unless it's something that's never been collected and I really want to have it. Like I just bought the issues of Martha Thomas's Dakota North and just sent them to be bound in a single volume so that we have that because it was never put in a collected edition. But for the most part, it should have a spine. It should be published by a publisher, although that's not entirely true. I back a lot of Kickstarters, and then the book goes into the stacks. I buy things at indie comics festivals, and those go into the stacks. People send me things, and those go into the stacks. But for the most part, if it can stand up on its own on a shelf, it'll go into the stacks and it'll circulate. Books that go into the stacks lose their dust jackets. So for something like McSweeney's number 13, which has that insane Chris Ware dust jacket, there was no way I was going to put that in the stack. So I bought that, and that went into Rare Books because
preserve the entire
package.
Exactly,
with its integrity.
I thought you were going to say it's now hanging in your house, so go on. Yeah.
Well, my copy is, Building Stories went to Rare Books because you can't take a box with 14 pieces and put it in the stacks and expect that all 14 pieces are going to come back every time somebody checks it out. So there are some exceptions here to there, but for the most part, if it has a spine and an ISBN, it's going to go into the circulating collection and people can check it out. There's a small subset of things that I've made non-circulating but still put in the circulating collections, and those are the IDW artist editions. Because every time those things leave the library, I have a small heart attack, and I figured, you know what? Let's just make that library use only. Okay, so what's interesting, though, is that the things that go into the circulating collection are, for the most part, mass-produced. So they may be in other libraries, but access to our circulating collections is extremely restricted. You have to be current student, faculty, or staff, an alumnus or alumna, or somebody who has some sort of affiliation with another institution that has reciprocal access privileges. Now, special collections, which is where completely unique materials like someone's papers or an extremely valuable and rare book or something with an odd format like Building Stories, that, even though its holdings are so rare and unique, that's open to the entire global community of scholars. Because essentially if something is completely unique and you're doing research on it, you have to be able to get to it.
Sure.
So if we have Chris Claremont's papers and you want to write a book on Chris Claremont, you need to come here and consult those papers, even if you're not a Columbia affiliate. Right. So that's how you get into Rare Books. And we have amazing stuff. The thing that I love so much about Rare Books is the kind of weird accidental corollaries you find between the comics materials that I'm collecting and the stuff that we already have. I curated an exhibition a couple of years ago of materials from the comics collections, and in the process I went through a ton of other collections. Michael Tisserand, for example, had found a hand-colored George Harriman drawing in the archives of a Doubleday editor named Daniel Longwell, who had been the editor for Archie and Mehitabel for the paperback edition. But my favorite bizarre corollary was like a week before the exhibition opened, one of the curators in Rare Books, Jenny Lee, came up to me and she said, "Karen, I'm working on the exhibition that's going to follow yours, which is for the centennial of Thomas Merton's birth." And Thomas Merton drew cartoons for Columbia student periodicals when he was here, and I found some of them. Would you like one for the collection, for the exhibition? Yeah. So you have just amazing things. You know, I posted a photo today on Facebook. I was up in the vault looking for something, and I walked down an aisle, and there's a box from the Rockwell Kent archives right next to a box from the Jack Kerouac archives. It's like, you know, just walking through the rare book stacks as you do.
Just cracking the knuckles and boy. So would you say that the New York centrism or the New York focus of what you're doing is, you know, sort of a differentiator with like the Billy and
Billy Ireland,
Library of Congress and places like that? Or
I think so. Yeah. I think that in a way it's not a huge focus because for so long the entire industry was
New Yorkish.
New Yorkish. And that's actually not fair because of the massive number of people who come from the Midwest and who've ended up in Billy Ireland, because I'm thinking mostly of the comic book business, really.
Right. But more strip focused.
And they've really branched out to an amazing amount of things. But yes, they have a huge focus on strips. But that history of comics in New York is a kind of they've ran in tandem for a very long time, really until the age of the fax machine. So I think that is a focus, but not a terribly constraining focus.
Sure. Is there any, we'll say, worry about the recent George Lucas? I'm going to have some museum of pop culture and put $1 billion into.
That's a huge worry.
Yeah.
You know, as I said before, anybody can come and consult things here.
Yeah.
I said it's open to the global community of scholars, but really anyone can create an online research account, come here, register with Rare Books, and request to see something from our collections. We have exhibitions, but you don't have to wait for something to go on exhibition in order to see it. In a museum, that's just not the case.
Right.
You have the tip of the iceberg that's on exhibition, and then you've got the iceberg, you know, locked away in storage. And it's not the same. It's not the same. So I get that, you know, George Lucas has a lot of money and a strong interest in pop culture, and God bless him. And I love that he's getting money to these cartoonists who aren't necessarily rolling in dough as a result of the career choices they've made.
Cartoonists.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, you know, another one of those incredibly unfair things. But I worry about all this material kind of disappearing from view and not being accessible to people who would want to consult it. And you know, the difference between a museum and a library also, and this is another differentiation between us and Billy Ireland, which says right in its name that it's a museum and a library. You know, they have massive gallery space. They do tons of exhibitions. We are primarily a library. So while we will take your original art, our focus isn't on your original art. We want the materials that tell your story. Correspondence, contracts, process materials, sketchbooks, notebooks. These are things that are maybe worthless on the market or not worth as much as an original piece of art on the market, but are gold mines for scholars. Mm-hmm. As I'm sure somebody like Michael Tisserand could tell you, the sorts of things that he consulted in order to write that book are not simply original art. So we're really anxious to be able to tell that story and allow people to tell those stories through the materials that we're collecting here.
Proudest possession?
Oh man, see if I say that about any one thing, it'll piss
no,
off
like
all
the
the
children
other people.
And all that
yeah.
stuff.
But I was very excited. Oh God, no! See, I can't say that.
one of your proudest possessions. It doesn't have to be the proudest, but one of the acquisitions you've done or discovered.
To get the Kitchen Sink Press archives and get tens of thousands of letters that Dennis Kitchen amassed over his 30-plus years in the business. Dennis, bless his heart, never threw out anything. He kept every letter in its original envelope, date stamped with the date of receipt. They're all in order in folders. Our archivists, our processing archivists basically just kind
Our
of...
work here is done.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a gold mine for an archivist. So to be able to tell that story, it's not just everybody who was ever in undergrounds. It's, it's Eisner and Kurtzman and all the people whose work he reprinted.
Right. Yeah.
Editors and publishers and
then the craziness with Tundra, but go on.
Yeah.
That's me establishing my 1990s comics nerddom. So
Well done.
you
Well
weren't
done.
around for that, but yeah. It was one of the greatest Comics Journal interviews of all time. The story of how Tundra sold itself to Kitchen Sink. Look up Gary Groth interviewed.
I was about to ask who was it?
Yeah.
Who was it that you interviewed? Because I'm sure that this is like
it was in the journal. It was Gary interviewing Kevin Eastman and explaining how Tundra spent $14 million on comics in 3 years, largely publishing black and white. That's what's so amazing about it. It's not like these were these giant color extravaganzas.
That reminds me of that great line of Hefner's about Kurtzman. We gave him an unlimited budget and he exceeded it.
Let me ask, Little Annie Fanny. Mm-hmm. I know it's not, the greatest work of Kurtzman's career. That said, you'd still rather have that than nothing, right? Because I have friends who are just like, you don't even talk to me about that stuff. I'm like, I know, but...
When I was a little girl, like 9, 10 years old, my brother, who was 10 years older than I am, had a subscription to Mad Magazine. And I read all of his Mads after he was done with them. So we're talking like 67, 68, 69. My chore in our family was to dust. And when I would dust my brother's room, I would open his nightstand and there would be the Playboys. And I would pull out the Playboys and I would read Little Annie Fanny because it was a comic strip.
Right.
And I'm sure 9-year-old Karen didn't get most of what was going on in Little Annie Fanny. But for me, and, I know that it was work he did for money. I know that it's not what his heart was in. I know that it's not what he would want to be remembered by, or I'm sure it's not what he would want to be remembered by. But for me, I have to say there is a nostalgic quality to Little Annie Fanny because it delighted me. It delighted 9 and 10-year-old
Oh, I was reading it as a 5-year-old a few years later, and that was it was a Kitchen Sink? Dark Horse, I think, put out 2 collections.
I think so, yeah.
And it was one of those... Of course, I got to remember who I was in 1978 as a 7-year-old child. The Burt Reynolds jokes, maybe I'll get them. Maybe not,
whatever.
Yeah, it was just one of those. Like,
you grow into them.
but that's the whole nature of comics. I mean, it ties into the comic that I sort of put at the center. It's just around the time, a little bit before you came back into comics. Dylan Horrocks' book, Hicksville, which, is the library of all the comics that never got made and the way comics will break your heart in many different ways. Which is why having something like this where you're actually building this collection, it seems to be it's this fulfillment, I guess, of a little something that Dylan was trying to do or trying to get at in that comic. Let me ask, the Chris Claremont papers, my 2 obvious jokes are, were they all lettered by Tom Orzechowski? Or are they much longer than everybody else's letters because he overwrote a lot of stuff in the X-Men?
They're mostly typewritten.
Okay.
But there's a wonderful, actually I think there's 2 boxes full of spiral notebooks, like stenographer's notebooks, not like binder notebooks, where he just wrote, like, jotted down notes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'd be...
5 pages long? I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I was raised on the X-Men with Claremont and Byrne, so I say this out of love, but he overwrote her.
I will take your word for that. Sometimes they'll be just brief kind of musings. Sometimes they'll have, title and issue number and plot words. Sometimes there'll be grocery lists. I mean, you just... It's all just, and in the most beautiful handwriting.
Yeah.
He has beautiful, impeccable handwriting. I have to say, he could have lettered his own work. Nothing against
Which
Tom.
is also a weird, Tom Warzikowski. Trust me, I was such a geek for this stuff as a little kid. That's, I was probably reading it a little bit too young, like reading the Frank Miller Daredevil strips when I was like comics, when I was like 9 years old.
Yeah, well,
maybe just a little,
That's how we ended up who we are now.
I know, which is a little bit demented. But do you do any negotiating with like collectors as opposed to artists and publishers? And is that
Yes. We actually acquired a collection about a year and a half ago of original editorial cartoon art. Over 2,100 pieces dating back to Thomas Nast.
Wow.
Yes, no, it's an amazing collection. There's like, oh, look, here's 6 Bill Maldons. Oh, look, here's a Herblock from 1938. Oh, look, here's 10 Oppers. Here's 4 McKays.
Wow.
It's just an insane. And I don't even know. He had approached the director of Rare Books, who had kind of put him on the back burner. And just before the then director left, he handed me this pile of stuff and said, you might want to pursue this. So this collector lived in California, and I was going on a business trip for another reason and decided to kind of fold him in. And I went and I looked at it, and it blew my mind.
Tex Avery, the eyeballs are jumping out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or just, melting into a puddle like the Wicked Witch of the West. It was just, it was insane. I'm taking photos. And the collector, Dennis Ryan, the nicest man you could ever want to meet in your entire life, came back and kind of made the pitch, got a lot of other people excited about it as well, and now we own it.
Very nice.
But mostly I try and deal with the creators.
Yeah. Is there a degree to which they either overestimate or underestimate the significance of their papers and have it?
You mean in terms of monetary or academic value?
Well, actually, let's go with both. Do they think they're worth more than they are sometimes? And do they not get,
how for the most
important?
part, we get them as donations.
Okay.
Which is good because I do not have a budget for comics at all. In fact, that was my first question when I was told that I was going to be the new curator of comics and cartoons. I said, does this mean I get a budget? They're like, yeah, no.
That's it's called roses, not raises. That's
There you go. So I still have to rely to a very great extent on the kindness of strangers. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to me that donations be an option. The couple of times that we have purchased, I've had to do some real hustling to raise money from other divisions or outside sources. And that's not a well that I can go back to. So often we're very new. Yeah. There are other people who've been doing this. There are other institutions that have been doing this a great deal longer than I have. Basically, we got the Claremont Archive in 2011. So 5 years, I haven't really been able to build a pool of donors, which
What's
is a shame.
your vision for how this grows?
A pool of donors.
That's what I figured was the case, and that's what spurred me on. Was that the idea, essentially, to build it as a, Columbia, but, we've got a New York cartooning money base or donor base?
I'm not entirely sure how it's going to happen, and I'm not sure I can talk about the plans we've got kind of in nascent form at the moment. But my plan is to make this a research destination for comic studies, especially as they relate to the history of New York City and to comics in New York City. And I don't think that that's too grand or unreachable a goal.
Weirdest research request?
I'm sorry?
Weirdest research request? Like somebody hitting you up for, you're like, really? You want to research him? But
I'm not sure I've had the weirdest research request yet. And I'm
it's
not
a very
sure,
into the weirdest thing you've been asked to draw in your sketchbook by, that's what I usually
I'm not sure that I would ever be surprised by. I'm not sure that my reaction would ever be, really? You want to research him? Because I assume that everybody is
worth
I was a medievalist,
True,
right?
True. What am I thinking?
That was my scholarly background. The stuff that we work on, so incredibly arcane and esoteric. So, and to a certain extent, that was one of my arguments for comics archives. Things that were the throwaway materials of the medieval or early modern period are now priceless artifacts in museums and libraries around the world. What's to say that the things that we see as disposable culture today are not going to be given the same valence, both academic and financial, 500, 1,000 years from now? So shouldn't we be collecting this stuff now?
Mm-hmm. Canonical for Leibowitz. Never mind. That's. I know.
That book so much.
I had to assume.
Exactly. Yeah, of course.
I just figured there again the Venn diagram.
All the library books, all the librarianship books, and all the scholarly novels.
Yeah, where did librarianism begin for you? Outside of poverty.
Well, it's funny. I was to a certain extent the black sheep of my family. I'm the youngest of three. And my older siblings were much better behaved than I was, and my parents were bemused by me on many occasions. And I have a cousin who was kind of the paragon of our family, who became a librarian. And the notion that she and I would end up in the same field is so hilarious to members of my family that when I did become a librarian, this was like I can't believe you and Phyllis are in the same line of work. But I have a book from when I was a little girl called A Child's Geography of the World. And if you look on the back page, the inside back cover, I have actually made a makeshift book pocket. So clearly the seeds were there. But where did it come from? I came to Columbia as a graduate student in medieval history. I was in the program for 6 years. I didn't finish my PhD. I didn't write my dissertation. And when I decided to leave the program, I didn't really want to leave Columbia. How do I stay? What sort of administrative job could I go?
Oh, see, I look for spaces in the ceiling that I could actually nest in. So you actually went a much better path. You
Very
took
pragmatic.
Than I did. Yeah.
Well, I was in my 40s by then, so and I'd had a very pragmatic background after those 15 years of bartending.
We'll get into that too.
Okay. So I started doing informational interviews around campus, admissions, development. But I had worked in the library as a graduate student, as a student worker. And my master's essay advisor was the librarian for history. And he said at one point, there's a non-professional job running course reserves in the library. Why don't you apply for that? I'm like, it never even occurred to me to apply for a job in the library. So I applied for it, and I had this epiphany. Mm-hmm. It's like everything I hate about academia is, the kind of publish or perish, departmental politics, no free time, completely unstructured.
Students.
Oh, I still have plenty of students to deal with. Plus, I teach in the summertime. Mm-hmm.
But otherwise,
none of that, but all the stuff that I love about academia, the marketplace of ideas, the intellectual ferment, the thrill of the hunt of research, that's here. So I decided to go to library school. And I went to library school while I was working in course reserves. And halfway through my library degree, the job I have now became open. And I applied for it and asked if I could do it on an acting basis while the search was on. And they let me do that. And then they withdrew the search, which was weird. But what they were doing is they were splitting it into two different jobs, and they reposted it, and one of the jobs was ancient and medieval, and it was basically like, I can do that. But, it was a full search, and there were other candidates, and they came for interviews, but I got it. I was very fortunate. I had faculty here who had trained me and who trusted me and who knew that they would have an ally in the libraries in me, so I had a lot of local support. And I'd worked in the library, so I knew a lot of the librarians, so... it's not the sort of job you usually get straight out of library school. So I'm very, very fortunate, and I'm never forgetful of that.
Before we get to bartending, ancient and medieval, where did that come from?
Yeah. My background, as I said, is in medieval history. That's what I came here to do graduate work in.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. How did I
get there?
Yeah. I do have a podcast with a guy who curated an exhibition on liturgical textiles in the post-Byzantine world.
Nice.
Trust me, I cover all sorts of areas for this. I'll send you a link to that one.
I would like that. We have a Byzantinist here, actually.
They fight. They actually.
I'm not at all surprised. Right. When I grew up. No, I'm not sure where I grew up. Actually, no, I didn't grow up in the medieval era. I was born in Michigan,
which is close.
Yeah. And when I was 10, we moved to New Jersey, and the way that my mom broke the news to me, I remember I was up in my room, and she came up to my room and she said, "I have something to tell you. Daddy's gotten a new job, and it's in New York City, and we're going to be moving to New Jersey." And I think she thought that I was going to need to be convinced in some way, as if just the sound of that wasn't immediately the most exciting thing I'd ever heard in my entire life. She said, "You're going to love New York. It's a beautiful city, and there are all sorts of wonderful museums. There's a museum called the Cloisters, which is all full of medieval art." And I'm like, "Yeah, sign me up." And that was one of the first museums they took us to after we moved, and I was just enraptured, And I had read like historical novels set in the Middle Ages. Anya Seton's Catherine, which is about John of Gaunt's second wife, Catherine Valois. And I'd seen Books of Hours, and I don't know, I was fascinated by the time. Mm-hmm. And it was always kind of there in the back of my head. And when I decided to go back to college, because I was a college dropout, I became a bartender as a college dropout. I had one semester of school at Rutgers, dropped out, became a bartender.
In the city or in New Jersey?
I'm
assuming, but I don't want to.
I left New Jersey as soon as humanly possible. I moved into the city a month before my 20th birthday, back in 78. I had gone to the Swedish Institute for massage therapy. I got my license. People said, "Oh, you're so good in the anatomy and physiology and the pathology courses. You should be a doctor." Thinking, yeah, I should be a doctor. Oh, wait, I got to get a bachelor's degree first, don't I?
Yeah, oops.
So, oops, I forgot to get, what was that t-shirt? Oops, I forgot to have children. Yeah. Oops, I forgot to get my bachelor's degree. So I was living downtown, so NYU was my local college, basically, and I went over there and I said, "I'd like to go to medical school, but I need to get a bachelor's degree. What do you advise? Should I major in something like biology or..." They said, "Oh, you should take a liberal arts degree with a pre-med framework because that makes you very well-rounded and medical schools will like that." I'm like, "All right.
Sure.
What you got?" So they handed me a catalog and I took it home. And this was in like 89, 90, right after Kenneth Branagh's Henry V had come out. And that movie had completely captured me. I dragged everybody I knew to see that. It's like, "Have you seen it yet?" "No." "I'll take you." Sat 9 times in the theater, taking all of my friends to it. And I started doing all this research on the Plantagenets and the Battle of Agincourt and the 100 Years' War. And so in the midst of all that kind of research, I saw that they had a major in medieval and Renaissance studies, and I thought, there you go, I'll do that. I applied, I got in. My advisor said, maybe focus on the medieval stuff your first semester and don't go straight to the pre-med stuff because, you're kind of easing your way back into college. Okay. So I enrolled in 3 different courses, a medieval philosophy, a medieval literature, and I think a medieval art history. And within 3 weeks, pre-med was just off the burner completely. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. This is what I'm going to do. So I graduated NYU. I applied to Columbia, got a full fellowship, and there you go.
What was it like being a college student in your early 30s?
Tiring. Yeah. Very tiring. I I remember my first day of Latin class. I'm looking around at everybody else. It was an early class. It was at like 9:30. I guess that's not as early as many of them, but it was.
But when you're 32 and you've been a bartender for 12 years, 9:30 is early.
Right, exactly. And when you're, working till 4 a.m, and I'm looking around at all these, dewy 18-year-olds who were living on campus, and I went up to my professor at the end of my first class, and I said, I introduced myself. I said, I'm a little worried, because I'm, X years old and I work till 4 a.m, and we meet 3 times a week, and I worry that I won't be able to really keep up. And she looked at me in this very kind of disapproving
demeanor,
down her nose a little bit, and said, well, I'm the same age as you are, and which was true. And what's nice, I just have to say, she's now one of my closest friends in the entire world. And I actually did better in that class than most of those dewy 18-year-olds, because when you're in your 30s and spending all of your money on college and working, crazy hours in order to pay for it, you become very focused on making sure that you're not wasting your time there. And when you're a dewy 18-year-old and are away from home for the first time, sometimes
it's a party.
It's a party. Yeah. So,
that's what I had wondered. One of my best friends, we were undergrads at the same time, but he was 8 or 9 years older, and it was a very different perspective because he'd worked, manual labor for a bunch of years. So to him, undergrad was very, very important. Where the rest of us, we were having fun.
It's 4 years that proved that you could make it through something for 4 years.
Yeah.
But no, I did very well. I'm going to brag a little bit. I graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa and departmental honors. So it's possible to bartend till 4 a.m. and put yourself through school and still do okay.
What I think is more of an astonishment is that the fact that you're involved heavily in comics, but are also, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it didn't actually dull my brain cells.
Yeah. Like Paul Mavridis tells us, it'll rot your brain.
Yeah, that's right.
It turns out his parents were right. But did you ever want to draw, be a cartoonist yourself?
Oh, God, no. I have absolutely no artistic talent whatsoever.
Good. Because it's a weird art form, and that they all assume that you're also a cartoonist.
Yeah.
Anytime you're out with cartoonists, or I find that it's, what do you do? I'm like, I read your comics. It's okay. I don't have to make my own. It's fine.
But at the same time, Gil, there's a weird camaraderie, even if you are the most embryonic cartoonist on earth. When you are with other cartoonists, they treat you as part of that.
Yeah.
And that's something that a non-cartoonist is never going to quite break into. You're never going to have that kind of fellowship of, what kind of pens do you use and how do you deal with this sort of,
I know. We take solace in we actually have jobs that pay us. And I know it's a weird trip, the idea that it's a form where they have that we'll say fraternity, even though we mean, gender neutral.
That's why I went with fellowship, actually. It's also problematic.
You may as well. We'll just go with fraternity. It's just us. No one's listening. It's okay. Although there was the funny moment at the last SPX, I was actually out at dinner with the Hernandez brothers and a couple of other people,
nice.
Because I'm friends with Tom Spurgeon, so that gets me in the door everywhere.
Tom's wonderful.
He is. But Beto Hernandez turned to me at one point and said, Captain America Civil War movie, what did you make of it?
And did you just freeze?
Well, I turned to him, I'm like, for God's sake, I stopped reading superhero comics because of you and your brother. No, I don't watch the movies. It was really you're to blame for the fact that I don't care about superheroes. And
I kind of love that he wanted to know, though.
Yeah, because he cared. He had all sorts of critiques of the movie. I'm like,
bless his heart.
You got me out of superheroes when I was 18 years old. So but it's kind of funny, I guess, in those lights. Actually, one thing I do want to ask. Those 12 years of bartending, what was your New York? 15. What was your New York like?
My New York was the 1980s New York.
Yeah.
My New York was fun.
Okay.
Fun.
We'll go with fun, but also a hellhole?
But no, I never thought of New York as a hellhole.
Cool.
The bad thing about the 80s, of course, and this is something that was highlighted really by being a bartender, by working in the restaurant business, was the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
The number of friends whom I lost just can't even be enumerated. And what we saw, a government that turned its back, actually didn't turn its back, laughed and made jokes about the death of, thousands and thousands of its own citizens. I mean, just the Reagan years in general, but I think there was a point, I was in my 20s, so I was a little callow, and I was having a lot of fun, and I was really cute back then, so I was having a lot of fun. So I wasn't necessarily quite as politically
no one is
rigorous as I am now. Yeah. So I just had a ton of fun. The music was great. There were tons of clubs. I was.
Do you have any? I was there before they broke big, like a Talking Heads moment or anything like that. By '78, they would have already been out.
I do remember going to a Squeeze concert that was in like this tiny little club.
Yeah.
And actually, that was the night I had the one-night stand with the guy that made me blonde.
Okay, I will leave that part in the show then. It's good that you can tie these things together,
Exactly.
The music, the sex, the New York,
Oh, on my 25th birthday, my roommate took me to dinner, and then we went dancing at Heartbreak, which was a club that was in a cafeteria by day that was turned into a club by night. And Timothy Hutton and Amanda Plummer were there, and we all danced together.
And he was beautiful.
Yeah.
Once upon a time.
So was she.
Yeah, yeah. But it's okay. We're looking good now.
Yeah.
We both aged much better than they have. So.
Yeah, God, that's right. Never let it be said.
As far as the library goes, white whale, is there a Moby Dick you would be hunting for? Some great acquisition, or something that no one has found. In particular, you're nuts for, or do you have dreams of things that either don't exist or that you wish exist?
Well,
literal dreams.
The white whale for a library that's collecting the history of comics in New York City would be the Spiegelman Archives. Mm-hmm. I don't expect to ever catch that white whale. I'd be happy with just the raw archives, quite frankly. But no, yeah.
Do you have dreams about literal, like sleeping dreams about acquisitions?
No.
Or of comics that don't exist? Because I dream about malls that don't exist. That's because I'm from New Jersey.
Where in Jersey?
Oh, a town called Ringwood, 25 miles north and west of the bridge.
Oh, okay.
Where were you?
I was in Fort Lee.
Okay, my parents when they got to America, they started in Fort Lee and then they moved out to Ringwood.
Oh, okay. Was that better? Or?
It's out in the
I
woods.
hated Fort Lee.
Yeah, it was basically proximity to New York City.
Yeah,
that was all
exactly.
But yeah, no, they moved out. It's woods, deer, bear, wild turkey, things like that. But still 25 miles from the bridge, so I could pretend that's New York.
Yeah. I had the same. I mean, I could see New York from my bedroom window, so
we have
it was like Oz,
The main road out of town is called Skyline Drive because you can actually see the New York skyline 25 miles away from it.
Nice.
So I've always actually it's one of the weird things. New York has always been my idea of what a city is. So anywhere else I travel, I sort of laugh generally because no one has a city that's quite composed like this city is. Do you have sort of ideal cities as those are concerned, or is New York really your paradigm for?
New York is everything to me.
Yeah.
Did you ever read the Philip Pullman novels?
No, I haven't.
His Dark
My wife
Materials.
loves those.
There's this whole thing where everybody who's born has this demon who's attached by this kind of
astral cord,
immaterial cord, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if it's severed, it's horrifying for both halves, and that's what I feel like would happen to me if I ever had to leave New York. That would sever my ethereal cord. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love other cities. I love Paris. I love Rome. I love London. But New York, even with all the shit that's happening here, even with the
it's turned into New Jersey.
Cancer of gigantic glass buildings in places where nothing should be over 10 stories. It's still, It's still my idea of paradise. And it's still kind of, you know, I grew up reading from a very young age, reading The New Yorker and watching old movies. And New York was just the epitome of sophistication and glamour and intelligence. And I know that people from outside New York will think that I'm horribly elitist for saying that, but I still feel that living in New York gives you advantages that you don't get anywhere else. Just to be breathing this air. I love this place. They're taking me out of New York in a body bag and before.
You've been portraited. You've been painted in a portrait by Drew Friedman.
I have.
Is that a blessing or a curse?
That is a blessing.
Okay.
That is
I know
a
you use it for
miracle.
your avatar, but, you know.
Oh, my God.
Were you afraid of being, you know, portrayed as an old Jewish comedian? Like
I was, you know, he accentuates things, but he doesn't put things there that aren't there. Mm-hmm. And I don't have liver spots, and I don't have a ton of wrinkles, so I pretty much felt like whatever I didn't know what photograph he was going to use. And in fact, when I saw the portrait, I still wasn't sure what photograph he used. I kind of stumbled over it as I was going through, I think it came up in a Facebook memory, you know, remember this from 2 years ago? It's like, oh shit, that's the one that Drew must have used. Oh, okay. But he made it better and more nuanced, you know, because that's what he does. He takes these photographs and he imbues them with something unnameable.
Well, I always harken back to the scene from the Crumb documentary where he and Jesse, Crumb and his son Jesse, are both drawing the same woman from the mental hospital yearbook, and Jesse does a photoreal drawing, and Crumb does a Crumb drawing. And it's one of those, you're like, oh, you technically did fine. He's a genius. This is where it lies. And, you know.
It's ineffable. Yeah, exactly. Drew has an ineffable quality. And when he told me he was going to do the portrait, I was stunned. Yeah. I asked him if it were possible, if I could afford it, could I buy the original art? He's like, oh, I'm going to give it to you. And I practically had to be, you know, swept up with the refuse. I just was blown away.
Besides that, are there any comics people you nerd out around? Like, I know there's people you appreciate, but like, do you get speechless at this
Charles
point?
Burns. I can barely even talk to him.
Really?
Oh my God. I worship Charles Burns. You know, I was, a big heavy metal reader. I had a subscription to heavy metal in the 80s. That was like my last comics thing before the 12-year exile in the desert. And so I discovered, actually, that's where I first saw Drew Friedman's work as well. Mm-hmm. And that's where I discovered Charles Burns, and his stuff was it just wasn't like anything.
Yeah.
And then I started reading his stuff when I kind of came out on the other side. You know, I read Black Hole and the trilogy, and I met him at a Mocha Fest, and I bought this kind of big folio pamphlet that he was selling, and he signed it, and he's lovely. But I would not know what to say to him. I would not know how to. I've spoken to Chris Ware without hesitation, but Charles Burns, I think he's the greatest. And I don't know why, but I can't tell him that. But he did draw in my Alice sketchbook, so I was able to ask him to do that.
Nice. We'll see if I ever get him on the show. You know, I'll ask you for questions beforehand. And
Okay.
Karen Green, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memory Show.
Gil, thank you.
No shaking because you're sick.
Oh, that's right. No shaking hands.
She tried to get me sick, everybody.
I'm not really. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be part of this.
And that was Karen Green. She's on Facebook as Karen Green, but you should also follow Comics at Columbia on Facebook so you can find out more about what she and the program there are up to. You can also find a crazy outdated website of hers, like GeoCities looking level, at the Columbia.edu website. Just look up Karen Green Columbia and you'll find that one. But you really should follow her on Facebook as well as Twitter at KLG19. So KLG and the numbers 1 and 9. And you'll find out more about her comics, her activism, her comics work, her activism, etc. Anyway, once we wrapped up, I asked Karen, so, who are you reading? If you want to hear her answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show, and that'll get you access to our monthly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. There are all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that podcast, a monthly physical mailing that I really have to start doing, but that I promise my supporters I will do. A patron-only blog. I actually recently posted the handwritten show notes for every episode, 1 through 200. At least some of the early ones I lost, but almost all of them are up there, so you can see what goes into making the show in terms of the notes and questions and stuff that comes up during the episode that I write down. I'm also looking to launch a series of ebooks, and there's more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, this episode was recorded in New York City as part of a doubleheader with last week's episode with Brad Gooch. So I split the cost in half. Still, it means a toll at the George Washington Bridge, which is like $12, $30 for parking on West 96th, $6 in subway fare, along with a really, really good pour-over coffee I got at Birch on 7th Avenue down in Chelsea. So if you want to help defray some of my ongoing costs, like the web hosting, the travel, equipment, coffee, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. You can make a one-time or recurring donation to the show. Speaking of supporters, special thanks go out to Paul W. Jones, Kevin Katila, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Zach Martin, Craig P. Steffen, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. I've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David's got a reunion project going with his great 80s band, David and David, and you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We should be back next week with author and journalist Ben Yagoda. I say should because we haven't recorded it yet. And I know I said my New Year's resolution was to always be 1 week ahead on the show. I sort of am, because this weekend I recorded a new one with Jessa Crispin, formerly the editor, founding editor of Bookslut. However, we have to hold that one off for a few weeks, so there is one in the can. It just doesn't happen to be next week's. But next week I am recording 2 episodes, and that should put me back on schedule up through February 21st. You don't care about any of that, but I do. Anyway, until next time, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Until next time, you have been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.